Hi everybody, my name is Enrique Contreras. My presentation is going to be about pollution effects on citizens and communities in New York City. So to go more in depth about this, I want to talk about the proposed problem, being pollution remains a critical matter within today's world, especially in policy creation where that, my apologies, we see that we see various debris being put into the air, such as particulate matter, CO2, and nitrogen dioxide being put into the air, while also affecting our ozone layer and overall air quality. But it also affects our states, communities, and people, which is what I'll be heavily emphasizing today in today's presentation. So I chose to analyze New York City due to its interesting city layout, such as heavy street traffic, with it coming with congested street layouts, which can potentially affect certain communities over the others, namely lower economic status areas, which in tangent also talks about transit services, right? So other more public services such as subways are being used by citizens daily, where you may see correlations with the longer you're in these subway systems, the longer you're exposed to certain matter. Now, in terms of my systems thinking approach, I decided to look at it from three different perspectives: a citywide, community-wide, and individual level. Whereas you can see from the citywide perspective, I talked about pollution, its correlation with hospitalization, such as health diseases or illnesses such as COVID-19 or asthma. Also talking about its correlation with exposure with low socioeconomic status communities, or SES communities to be more specific. Pollution its correlation with exposure with at-risk subpopulations such as pregnant women, which you'll see a very interesting scenario where pollution doesn't just come from, industrial emissions, but also we consume pollution through using products, and you'll be seeing that very soon. Now, in terms of my ecosystem characteristics, we'll just be going through each problem as it is, because it does play in tandem as to how people and communities interact with pollution within this ecosystem. With the first one being asthma and pollution in New York City, where the problem was there was very strong correlations with asthma hospitalizations and pollutant exposure levels being pretty high in the 1990s, where they found nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone being found in participants within this study, and also just in general within these hospitals, right? Where you see this overall finding of emissions from industrial facilities being linked with increasing hospitalization rates within communities such as the Bronx. And they essentially created policy to help counteract this. However, with COVID-19 happening, you do see in today's modern era a very similar trend where COVID-19 hospitalizations within ICU admissions showed higher level of nitrogen dioxide and particulate matter exposure on average, showing that there was correlations with pollution and illnesses or diseases such as COVID-19, showing how pollution plays an overall hand in hospitalizations similar to the asthma case showed previously and COVID-19 in this instance. Now, to talk about more along the lines of the low socioeconomic communities that I mentioned earlier, you essentially see how income disparities have correlations with unequal population exposure within SES communities and outside these communities as well, right? Wealthier people will not be experiencing this pollution exposure in comparison to SES communities, which ties to overall health impacts mentioned previously, right? Could this potentially impact our COVID-19 and asthma situations? Just food for thought, right? And in terms of overall findings, you do see a strong correlation or link in regards to income inequality and health risks associated with pollutant exposure. And to kind of talk more along the lines of this diagram, you do see with the primary interstate highways how it's going across all these groups of people, right? Intersecting through here, all the participants are experiencing subway pollution, which goes into our next point. How does pollution correlate with subway emissions in New York City, and how does it affect our SES communities? Well, you see through a study made by Azad that emissions disproportionately affected SES communities in NYC, showing that particulate matter, high levels at that, right? You see black and Hispanic folk experiencing higher than white people, showing that there is unequal exposure in regards to this overall consumption of particulate matter, with SCS individuals on average experiencing more due to longer commutes, right? The longer you're in a subway for, the more you're consuming that overall air pollutant, showing an overall finding that it consists of vulnerable populations who are being exposed within this ecosystem, right? And lower income communities as well, mentioned last slide, right? You see people who make very little money comparison to people who are making pretty good money being exposed longer, right? They might be working jobs that have them out in the city more, whereas there are more ergonomic ways of working, right? With hybrid working platforms and whatnot. Some people don't have that privilege. They have to go out there and have to be exposed to these pollutants. Now, to talk about pollution on a more individual scale, you can see it through the pregnant woman case that I mentioned here, right? Personal care products, right, such as perfumes, nail polish, and essentials such as medical devices, do have innate pollutants such as phthalates being put into these products, which are essentially being exposed to pregnant women, highlighting risks associated with pollution being within vulnerable subpopulations, such as pregnant women. As you can see right here, perfume had very high levels of DEP, alongside deodorant, alongside hairspray, alongside nail polish, right? Now, to talk about the current and proposed sustainable strategies, I want to talk about some of the current ones New York City is doing right now, such as implementing cleaner transportation options through the implementation of electric buses, in which you do see New York City implementing this, shown through a test sample of how shuttles can implement electric buses, and also in Staten Island and Brooklyn routes showing more electric buses being implemented. Whereas in green urban planning, you see more cleaner areas being made, right? Allowing for cleaner air to go through there, and allowing for people to experience that in comparison to more congested, pollutant trafficked area. Now, I'm talking about my proposed sustainable strategy. I think through the power of marketing and more along the lines of letting people know what exactly they're in for, right? When you're going to places like Staten Island that may not be as polluted, you won't have to worry about that, right? Maybe there's health risks that come with that, and you want to make sure in a good area where you're not put at risk, right? Whereas Manhattan has very polluted areas, which may potentially increase, right? Shown through the COVID-19 case study, shown through the asthma case study, you could be at a risk for hospitalization. Which, if citizens were to know more about this, you could see them advocating for cleaner infrastructure and more policy-oriented actions to tackle pollution, right? While policy is made on the basis of compromises, you do see them being made if more people than not want it. Now, in terms of my conclusion, just kind of want to summarize all these points I made previously. Pollution disproportionately affects low-income and minority communities within our ecosystem, right? Through subway emission exposure or overall air pollution exposure, it does disparity, right? And in regards to hospitalizations in New York City, you do see strong correlations with pollution, alongside correlations with COVID-19 and asthma, with particulate matter and nitrogen dioxide being found within that. And on a more individual level, you do see consumer products in New York City having pollutant material inside of it, which is being exposed to pregnant women, or more specifically, subpopulations who are at risk, right? This could maybe apply to elderly people as well. It just is a thing. Now, in regards to the references, I want to talk about some of the literature review I used for it. So all 5 of my sources were used for this. And also I decided to add more within the pictures I decided to use. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and I look forward to the questions being posed from this from both my professor and my fellow peers. Thank you.